I can see Catherine joined. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining on time. I'm still waiting for our co-host, Rob Dixon, and we'll start. You can enjoy the music in the meantime. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I will just wait a couple of more minutes to get some of the participants, and we'll start probably in a minute or two. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so I can see that Ambassador Dixon also joined us, so we could start this this event. Welcome everyone to this joint Center for the Study of Democracy and British Embassy in Sofia event on the potential of offshore wind in Bulgaria. I will just say a few housekeeping rules. This is a public session. It will be recorded and it's live streamed in Facebook, so people could enjoy the rich discussion today. All the rules will be posted in the chat below. If somebody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand, and our moderator for today, Martin Vladimirov, my colleague, the director of CSD's Energy and Climate Program, will invite you in the discussion. Also, please use the Q&A down in your menu to post your questions so that we could respond to them. Let me just say that CSD is committed to the energy transition that Europe has set as a goal in 2030 and 2050, and I guess the whole world. I think this is one of the defining policies for the European Union and for our British and US allies, and I think this is also be the biggest discussion in the future on how we're going to bring in China and others to these policies. Bulgaria has a lot of renewables energy potential, and when we were discussing the policies of renewable energy and the recovery and resilience plan, the biggest public investment program for Bulgaria in Bulgaria's history, we thought there is one key missing element, and that is offshore wind. This is how we came to discuss offshore wind, and you will hear today from my colleagues what we found out, and we really look forward that Bulgaria fills in this void. We think that the new caretaker government that was just appointed should fill in this void. We should have the development of offshore wind potential in Bulgaria. We should start with the legal framework and establishing actually the possibility not just for offshore industry, but also for the whole technology value chain, so that Bulgaria could be part of this revolution that has started in Europe and in particular in Britain. And with that, allow me to wish you a great discussion today. We have a great panel, and to invite for a few words my co-host today, Ambassador Rob Dixon. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Ruslan, colleagues, friends, thank you so much for joining us today, and apologies for being just 30 seconds late. The last moment you want your Wi-Fi to die is just before a great online panel, but such is life. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be joining you today, and I'd really like to thank CSD for organising what I hope will be a really good discussion this afternoon. We've got a fantastic panel, and I'm really looking forward to it. Today, of course, marks 46 days until COP26, until it begins in Glasgow. At COP26, the 26th United Nations Climate Conference, as everybody on this call will know, is widely considered to be our last best chance of avoiding the really catastrophic effects of climate change. And the international community, governments, business, individuals need to do their utmost, everything they can, in order to be able to, at the very least, reach the global target of limiting global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. The goal, of course, set by the Paris conference just a few years ago. But we're already seeing the dire impact of climate change on every region of the Earth. The very clear message, the clear wake-up call from the IPCC in its last report is that we're off track. And the greenhouse gases we've been pumping into the atmosphere for decades are altering nature's precious balance. We're disrupting the finely tuned complex system that is the world's climate, and those effects are closing in. Global temperatures are rising. Last year was the hottest year on record. This last decade was the hottest decade on record. In the past 30 years, we've lost over 50% of the world's coral reefs. And this summer has seen devastating wildfires from North America to the Balkans, including here in Bulgaria. And we are seeing very clearly the direct impact of our policies. Now, the positive news amid all of this is that if we choose to act, there is a possible better future, one with clean air, one where we see controls on the rise of global temperatures, one where we see green energy, one where we see greater use of renewables, smart adaptation, and so on. And so today I'm really pleased to be able to help open this discussion on what I think and what we believe in the UK is a success story and a positive story amid all of this challenge that we are facing, and a story that we think Bulgaria could emulate, and that is offshore wind. Now, partly because of offshore wind, the UK has been able to cut its emissions by 44% over the last 30 years, while at the same time growing its economy by 78%. It can be done. In less than 20 years, the UK has developed the largest offshore wind sector in the world. That's powering 7.5 million homes. A relevant number if you're in Bulgaria, it's almost in touching distance. This has led to over 400,000 low carbon jobs in the United Kingdom. And the UK government believes that clean growth presents one of the most significant business and economic opportunities, as well as a huge opportunity for tackling global climate change. This hasn't happened by accident. It's happened as a result of politically difficult decisions. It's happened as a result of long-term investment, regulatory frameworks, of incentivizing and creating marketplaces, and ultimately creating a green economy which will drive the twin targets of economic growth, but also changing our energy model for the future. So that is why that we are so focused here with our international partners, including here in Bulgaria, to realize the benefits of sustainable energy and clean growth quickly. Now, why Bulgaria? For me, as well as Bulgaria looks at its own low carbon transition, we really want to make sure that the fantastic opportunities of offshore wind are fully considered, and considered, as Ruslan says, as part of the recovery and resilience plan. The World Bank has already estimated the technical potential of offshore wind in the Black Sea to be 435 gigawatts. And I'm really keen to hear from colleagues much more expert than me about what the potential would be in Bulgarian waters in the Black Sea, and how that can be exploited to drive that much needed transition. Drawing on the expertise of the UK, I'm confident from what I understand that enabling the market uptake of offshore wind energy in Bulgaria could mobilize private investments as well as economic growth. It could catalyze not only the development of large-scale renewables generation, but also investment in that complex supply chain that creates new jobs that such development would require. And in this regard, offshore wind could play a really crucial role in facilitating the low carbon transition process here in Bulgaria. It could offer stable power and therefore long-term substitute for increasingly uneconomical, expensive and dirty coal. It's also arguably strategically important, as it could help address the long-term standing challenge in Bulgaria of dependence on fuels, particularly gas from overseas. Many international organizations, among them the International Renewable Energy Agency and the International Energy Agency, have already published studies that highlight the potential of offshore in that shift to the low carbon green economy. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. And thank you so much again for everybody who has joined. And I hope that this is the start of increasing understanding of the potential of renewable energy in Bulgaria, particularly in the Black Sea, which isn't always considered as part of one of those solutions here in Bulgaria. And I'm sure this will facilitate a number of good ideas exchanged, and I hope it's very much part of the process. So thank you to CSD, thank you to colleagues and friends for joining this discussion. It's great to have you online, and I look forward to learning more, hearing more, and maybe building on this for the long term. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you so much, Rob. Indeed, this was a great background, and I'd like to thank you and the British government, and of course, Catherine, one of your predecessors who was also here and who will today talk on how we can make the whole business case. I see also that there are a lot of policy people and experts joining us today for the discussion. I can see also that Ran Dobrev was former minister and chairman of the Energy Committee in Bulgarian Parliament. I think they will play a role in the future. So we look forward to that discussion. We look forward to continuing that, because we have a lot of work on building the legislative and the regulatory environment, piloting, and then of course growing that whole industry. And without much ado, I will now turn the floor to the moderator today, my colleague Martin Vladimírov, the Director of Energy and Climate at CSD, whose team has been at the forefront of helping Bulgaria make this transition. Martin, the floor is yours. I look forward to this great discussion today.
Thank you so much, Ruslan, and thank you very much, Ambassador Dixon. This was a very inspiring speech. Because really you nailed the point, which is the easiest and probably cheapest way to decarbonize the electricity system is to unlock the enormous potential for renewable energy, because it doesn't make only sense for countering global climate change challenges, but also it makes business sense. Today we have an excellent panel of business, very experienced business representatives of the wind industry, former diplomats, current government officials that are trying to build the renewable energy policy on global level. We have representatives of the financial industry that will play a key part of supporting this leapfrogging effort, because offshore wind for countries like Bulgaria is a leapfrogging effort. I'm looking forward to a great discussion. Before I move to the panel itself, I would like to ask my colleague Maria Trifonova, who is a research fellow at the economic program of CSD, to present the key findings from our latest analysis, the first ever assessment of the technical potential for offshore wind energy in the Bulgarian section of the Black Sea. Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to meet you virtually. So I'm sharing my screen now. I would like to show you some figures and some maps. I hope that you can see it. So maybe just a few words about, during the drafting of this report, we had several occasions to present some preliminary data and some of our findings. So I wouldn't go into many details. The report is online as well. So I would like to answer the question, what is new in our assessment of the wind potential? Our calculations of the technical wind offshore capacity enrich current currently existing studies, which were based on EU-wide assumptions, by including country-specific data and regulations. We also reflect the technology trends, which is why we assume wind speed at turbine heights of 150 meters. And as a result, we came to the gross technical potential of 116 gigawatt offshore wind energy for the entire exclusive economic zone of Bulgaria, 26 gigawatt of which could be utilized by bottom fixed concept, meaning they could be utilized with the feasible and cost competitive or cost efficient technologies available now. Then we were also interested in potential deployment areas which are suitable for the project development, the criteria relevant for our pre-selection were actually the wind resource metrics and the water depths, then the distance to shore, avoidance of dense navigation routes, and avoidance of possible environmental restrictions. So we identified 4 areas. The most promising one of all these 4 is located close to the border line with the Romanian territorial waters. So considering limitations such as environmental protection and maritime roads, only this area offers more than 4 gigawatt deployment potential. The next area is small, and the reason for its preselection is actually its proximity to large industrial energy consumer, which are based in Varna. The third and the fourth areas, they provide significant potential. However, their deployment requires further measures such as rerouting of maritime traffic or technology improvement and grid innovations, although we consider them important to keep in mind for further development of strategies and plans, maritime spatial plans, for instance. For these areas, the capacity factors that could be achievable are between 40 and 48%. The average cost for a unit of generated electricity from bottom fixed installation is estimated. I just want to click to the next slide. Is estimated in the range of 62 to 90 euro megawatt hour, and the average cost for a unit of generated electricity from floating installations is estimated between 120 and 158 euro per megawatt hour. The offshore energy industry could have significant contribution for local communities. And this is something that we wanted to highlight in the report. One potential benefit could be highly skilled job creation opportunities, as well as for the formation for local technological cluster and local value chain for delivering of equipment. Another very important benefit is actually could be actually for the 2 Bulgarian ports, Varna and Burgas, and their potential transformation to decarbonization hubs, which should be which are required to support the offshore wind energy industry formation. So in this report, we actually wanted to include different aspects which are accompanying the industry development, such as planning and licensing procedures, environmental and biodiversity regulation, infrastructural obstacles, policy milestones or missing policy milestones, economic considerations, social acceptance of wind and regional cooperation. So all of these aspects are analyzed more in detail. And based on our analysis, we provided actually a list of recommendations. So I will just list some of them. First of all, the utilization of the offshore wind energy potential requires that policymakers implement a consistent, coherent, and well-coordinated policy strategy, which is actually needed to initialize also a range of regulatory adjustments. The main problems right now are the missing policy milestone, the unclear procedures for spatial planning and licensing, also for decommissioning of potential plants, and also the underwhelming economic incentives. So we summarized our recommendation in 5 main pillars. The one is plan, enable, support, engage, and couple. So as I said, the first set is directed to development of targets and deployment corridors, which concerns some major strategic documents such as the National Energy Strategy, the NECP, or also the Maritime Spatial Plan. Under enabling the industry, we mean conducting legal gap analysis and developing the corresponding legislative framework, and also the implementation or usage of EU funding for feasibility studies, pilot projects, port infrastructure development or improvement, innovation, green grid or network improvements. The support for the industry is important in form of adequate financial support schemes, and also such financial instruments that could provide more certainty for investors in more predictable remuneration for the future investment, engagement with stakeholders, with local stakeholders or large energy consumers is important, not only for the social acceptance, but also for identification of major gaps and problems. We consider very important the cross-border mechanisms and cooperation. Maybe you know that Romania, Greece, and Turkey already have some plans related to development of offshore wind projects. And coupling, so it is also important that the future offshore wind energy industry is coupled with the plans for green hydrogen development and deep decarbonization for key sectors such as energy, transport, and industry. You might have questions related to our calculations and our assessment, and we are here to answer your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And just to clarify, in our work over the last 12 months in trying to study the technical potential of offshore wind, we tried to reach out to most key stakeholders in the country who will be relevant in unlocking this potential, in making sure that private investment is channeled in this direction. And we have identified many bottlenecks that we'll be happy to work with authorities, with governments in the future, and try to find a way to move ahead, because Bulgaria is still the only country in Europe with access to a sea, which has not done actually anything in the field of offshore wind, neither regulatory framework nor an actual investment project. And I think there is a lot of potential to do that in the near future. Now I'd like to open the floor to the panel. We'll start with Gilles Dixon, who is the CEO of Wind Europe, really the voice of wind energy in Europe. It contains more than 400 companies and organizations across the whole value chain, including turbine manufacturers, component suppliers, financial institutions related to wind energy, research institutes. And it's an association that actively promotes the integration of wind power in Europe. Previously, Mr. Dixon was also the Vice President for Global Public Affairs at Alstom, and he's a former civil servant at the UK government with huge experience in negotiating renewable energy policy in Brussels. Mr. Dixon, the floor is yours. Before I give you the floor, I just want to remind speakers to try to be as short as possible, around 7 minutes, and I'll give you a sign if you're going overboard. And if you want to check out our report, it will be posted in the chat as a link, and you can find it on our website. Thank you. Gilles, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Good afternoon, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. Delighted to be with you this afternoon. Martin, can I share some slides, please? Thank you very much indeed. Right, great. Okay, so I hope you can see these now. Yes, can you see them, Martin?
Yes, go ahead.
Good. Okay, so where is wind energy in Europe today? The blue bars are the capacity of wind energy installed in every country. This is offshore and onshore wind combined, and the red bars are the share of wind in every country's electricity mix. Across Europe as a whole, wind is now 16% of all the electricity we consume. Most of what you see here is onshore wind. To illustrate that, I'm now going to show you this map with only the offshore wind on it. There you have it. The UK, of course, is the leader in terms of gigawatts of offshore wind capacity installed. Now, the International Energy Agency thinks that offshore wind is going to be the #1 source of electricity in Europe from around 2040 onwards, with onshore wind the #2 source of electricity. So there's huge expansion across Europe coming in offshore wind. Let's look at this another way. This is the wind energy we have in Europe today. The dark blue is onshore, the light blue is offshore. That's what we'll have in 2030, and that's what the EU want us to have in 2050. So what about the Black Sea? What is the potential? So the more orange these areas are, the higher the wind speed, so that is very good. If it's the diagonal lines, then that is sea depths of up to 50 meters. So that is where you do the normal, traditional bottom fixed offshore wind, which is most of what we have in Europe today. Where it's the dots, the sea is deeper than 50 meters, and there we need to do floating offshore wind. So we can see clearly here that for Bulgaria, floating offshore wind is going to be key. And the good news here is that floating offshore wind technology has now come of age and is set to grow rapidly. We only have a few projects today, and the UK has been playing a leading role in the development of floating offshore wind. This will start to grow in the next few years. By 2030, we will have 7 gigawatts already of floating offshore wind. The costs of offshore wind generally have fallen spectacularly in the last 7 years. As you see here, this is all of offshore wind in Europe. Here on the right-hand side is the wind industry's forecast of how the costs of floating offshore wind are going to fall in the next 30 years. And this is crucial for Bulgaria. Floating offshore wind is much more expensive today than conventional bottom fixed offshore wind. But you see major cost reductions are on the way. France is taking a lead here. They are running the world's first ever floating offshore wind auction as we speak. We expect that the winning prices will be below 100 euros already per megawatt hour, and we'll hear the results next summer of that. So it's crucial when deploying offshore wind in the Black Sea or in any other sea basin in Europe that, as Maria has said, you have the right financial framework, the right government support for the finance. And here the key thing is to have contracts for difference. This is the UK model for supporting offshore wind. Now, what you have on the top here is the revenue model of an offshore wind that has no public financial support. It's relying purely on the wholesale electricity market for its revenue. It's variable, if not volatile revenue. What the UK introduced and many countries around Europe have now copied is the contract for difference model, where you bid into an auction, you win a fixed guaranteed revenue, which is the red line here for the first 15 years of your project. When the market price is below that level, then the government pays you the difference. When it's above that level, you, the wind farm, pay the difference back to the government. So this is not a subsidy. It's a revenue stabilization mechanism. Governments are paying out some of the time, they're getting paid back some of the time as well. So it's cheap for governments. And crucially, it means that the wind farm developers can raise finance at very low cost. They can raise lots of debt. They're much less dependent on equity. And if the financing costs are lower, the total lifetime costs of the offshore wind farms will be lower as well. That's how much it costs. Total average lifetime costs of running an offshore wind farm that only has market revenue. If it has a contract for difference, the same wind farm costs almost half as much. Finally, the economic benefits of offshore wind. We've talked about the climate benefits. The economic benefits are significant. That's how much offshore wind is contributing to the EU economy today. Every new offshore wind turbine that we build in Europe generates, on average, that amount of economic activity. That's how many people are working in offshore wind in Europe today. And if governments deliver on their current plans, that's how many jobs the offshore wind industry will be supporting in 2030. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Gilles, and thank you for pointing out that we are already entering the new age of floating offshore wind, which we didn't touch upon so much in our report itself because we focused on the low-hanging fruit in a way, bottom-fixed platforms. But as you mentioned, really the future is, in the Black Sea is floating offshore wind energy, and we hope that once there is a way paved for these cheaper, easier to implement investments, the floating ones will come naturally after that. And now moving on, I'm very happy to welcome Catherine Barber, who is a Deputy Head of Mission of the UK in Bulgaria. And she's back with us in a new role. She's now the leading team member of the UK's Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy that focuses on decarbonizing heavy industry in an attempt to achieve a net zero economy. Catherine, the floor is yours. I'm very happy to have you here, and we're looking forward to your view on how to unlock renewable energy potential in general. What are the kind of the basis, what are the regulatory, if you want, framework that is necessary to achieve this? Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Здравейте на всички и благодаря за поканата. It's lovely to be back with you. Congratulations to CSD on this really interesting new report, and hello to all of my friends in the embassy. I miss you all. Well, Giles has explained really well some of the financial mechanisms that we have adopted in the UK to get offshore wind growing. It has really been a transformation for us. When I started working in Sofia just over 10 years ago, 40% of our power in the UK still came from coal. And now that amount is negligible. And we've had a lot of growth in renewable energy. We've made it much more attractive to investors through that contract for difference model that Giles explained. And the biggest growth by a long way has been in offshore wind. And in 2017, I think exactly 4 years ago this month, there was a really important moment when the marginal price of offshore wind spectacularly beat the expectations in one of these auctions, and it became cheaper than the cost of new gas-fired power. So for the first time, it wasn't just an environmental motive, it was a really commercial motive. We got offshore wind to be very competitive. And this week, we actually launched the 4th auction round, which is the biggest yet. And we're looking to secure 12 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, which is more than the previous 3 rounds combined. So our growth is really exponential. And again, without making an official prediction about the results, I'd be very surprised if offshore wind didn't do well in that. I think that Dan may speak about some of the policies that we put in place that enabled the commercial sector to flourish in offshore wind. I might say a few words about how we adapt our economy to integrate all of this clean power. So there's really a lot of electrification in the UK. And so even though we are investing heavily in energy efficiency to make our existing energy consumption go down, we think that electricity demand will rise by 50% by the mid-2030s to keep up with growing demand from new sources. So that will be, for example, powering our vehicles. I recently bought my first electric vehicle and I love it. We expect a lot of installations of electric pumps for heating our homes. And we're also trying to get industry to electrify, and that's one of the things I do day to day now, particularly looking at low temperature industrial processes, but also some quite big industrial processes like steel are also moving towards using electric arc furnaces. And all of these things are beneficial for UK emissions because of that growth in renewable energy and particularly offshore wind. And there are some changes we've had to make to our grid. We're trying to use the data more smartly and also just to update and to grow the grid. So when I moved to Sofia just before 2010, almost all of our electricity in the UK was produced by just 56, I think, major power plants. It was very concentrated. And now we have, I think, 3,000 large renewable schemes and more than 800,000 small sites. And you can imagine that needs a lot of extra connectivity into the grid. And that's something that the UK government has invested a lot in. So perhaps I'll stop at that point, but I'm happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Catherine. That was a really short but very thorough presentation of why the UK is so successful. Indeed, electrification is the name of the game. Also in some modeling scenarios that we did for Southeast Europe recently, we identified a combination of massive electrification, including of the industry, together with the introduction of cutting-edge renewable energy plants that can actually cover also base load capacity like offshore wind, will solve or will help solve the conundrum between efficiency of renewable energy, intermittency problems, and the actual decarbonization of the non-energy sectors, which is, the biggest challenge probably in the future. Now moving on to Dan McGrail, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Renewable UK. Renewable UK is one of the biggest non-for-profit organizations that supports renewable energy companies, renewable energy institutes in providing kind of a hub for ideas, a hub for investments in the UK. Mr. McGrail was also the former CEO of Siemens Engines, and Siemens Engines has had a huge role in the construction of the offshore wind turbine blade factory at Hull city. So it has had a huge role, of course, in general in unlocking the offshore wind potential across Europe. Mr. McGrail, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Martin, and good afternoon, everybody. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak, and congratulations on the excellent report, which I think details very clearly the opportunity, but B, the steps to get there. And I really wanted to share with you a little bit about the journey that the UK has been on, because I think we can see that Bulgaria is really at the beginning of that journey, and I think there are some lessons that may be helpful. To set the scene, such as the success story, to use the ambassador's words, of offshore wind in the UK, by any analysis, the UK's plan to reach net zero by 2050 is very much built on a system which will be significantly powered by offshore wind, with many forecasters suggesting that the UK will have over 100 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050. And in the year of COP26, offshore wind has very much become the jewel in the crown of the UK's renewable energy transition. And the elements of success of that are quite clear, I think, as we look back. But just to say today, and I want to sort of start with the economic benefit that this brings, because I think it's very much one of the things that is an incentive for governments and policymakers. Today, the UK employs about 26,000 people in offshore wind directly, but by 2026, so really triggered by the auction that Catherine referred to, we expect to reach 69,000 people in the offshore wind industry right across the supply chain. But really what happened and that made the UK successful was, I would say, a very rapid process of moving from demonstration to commercialization to industrialization of the technology. And in the last 4 years alone, between the first and the third auctions, we saw costs really fall by something like 65% of renewable energy, so in just 4 years. And the real triggers for that are, first of all, ambition, very clear ambition from the government, a very bankable framework, the contract for difference that was mentioned, and a policy of industrial interventionism by the government to support the expansion of supply chain. I'd like to touch on a couple of the elements in each of those stages, and my reflections on what that might mean for Bulgaria. Clearly, in the demonstration phase, I think this can be something that's quite streamlined for Bulgaria. Clearly, proof of concept is necessary, but a lot of the hard yards have already been passed through by countries like the UK. So this can be a process that is very fast, but collaboration is important. I think in this stage, a collaborative approach by industry, but with government, is an essential component of success. And that builds trust to move into the next phase, where I think targets become very, very important, where government sets targets and ambition, intermediate targets, but also long-term targets. And this is the phase when market design becomes important to create that investable mechanism that drives competition, but also maintains collaboration in the sector in the long term. As one moves into the industrial phase of the sector, ports are essential components. Infrastructure is needed, and one shouldn't underestimate the challenge in making sure that ports are ready and available, because the needs of the offshore wind industry are different. But also thinking early about coexistence with other maritime sectors and developing a supply chain, which I think is key for public support and buy-in. And finally, early planning of transmission infrastructure and engaging with affected communities are things that really help speed up development later down the line, and particularly when taking into consideration the impact of transmission. So really the key message is that the UK has developed world-leading experience and capability in this, and It's good that you've mentioned floating wind, because I join you today from Aberdeen, where we're holding the biggest ever conference on floating wind in the UK with over 500 people here. And what is very clear is that the speed of development of floating wind is very, very quick, and that should also something that will support the development of the sector in Bulgaria in the long term. So government and industrial collaboration, I think, is key in an emerging sector, maintaining that collaboration throughout the process. And of course, my final message is that UK companies and the supply chain here is very much ready to support and engage with companies. And anyone who'd like to join a conference in a fortnight's time on global offshore wind is more than welcome to do so to learn more.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you for the kind invitation. We'd love to join if it's possible online, of course. Thank you for focusing on the impact of offshore wind on the industry. We also believe that in the Bulgarian context, offshore wind can help actually lead the way for an industrial transformation of some of the regions close to the most prospective areas for offshore wind development. There are huge industrial parks close to Varna, which is the main port on the Black Sea, the biggest port on the Black Sea in Bulgaria, and it could benefit from cheap offshore wind-based electricity that can power, for example, hydrogen production. So it is crucial to engage both the industry and in general local stakeholders in the process, because the main benefits would be accrued to them. So thank you for this aspect. And now I'm turning to our last speaker of the panel, who is Georgios, and I'm sorry for pronouncing this name incorrectly, Georgios Chkiorios, who is the Regional Associate Director of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, focusing on Southeast Europe and the energy sector. He knows Bulgaria quite well, actually, and he has spent quite a lot of time here. He was involved in one of the first big wind park projects in the country, onshore wind park project, and he knows the situation very well. And I'd love to hear from him, what are some of the mechanisms for reducing financial risk involved in projects that are new to a country like Bulgaria? How can we mitigate this risk? How can we reduce the premium, the risk premium? Georgios, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. Thalata, 800 square kilometers of untapped potential on your doorstep, the sea. By seizing this opportunity, offshore wind energy will enable Bulgaria to effect its transition to green energy. It will also ensure that this country remains a significant green energy exporter for the region. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm EBRD's Regional Head of Energy for Southeast Europe. Over the last 20 years, I've led a number of important energy transactions in Bulgaria, including the modernization of the Maritsa plants and the largest wind farm in Varna. My name is Georgios Giauris, but everyone calls me George. Over the past few decades, Bulgaria has been a major electricity exporter to Southeast Europe, supplying energy produced in its nuclear, lignite, and hydro plants. However, the current climate challenge and EU's climate policies call for an urgent transition of Bulgaria's energy sector to green energy. Economic reality is also driving this change. Numerous attempts to develop new nuclear plants in Bulgaria have failed, both in terms of public acceptance and their economic feasibility. Lignite plants are no longer economically viable and will have to be closed down. And it's no longer easy to develop large hydro plants. While Bulgaria's National Energy and Climate Plan calls for around 2.6 gigawatt of new renewable capacity by 2030, this won't be enough to affect Bulgaria's green energy transition. More investments in green energy are required. Offshore wind is one of the fastest growing renewable energy technologies, and Bulgaria has a huge and unique opportunity to harness this resource and decarbonize its energy sector. But there are many other benefits that offshore wind energy can give Bulgaria. Developing renewable at scale without congesting land areas, reducing energy dependency, providing local employment opportunities, jobs that could partially offset the impact of the energy transition and the lignite plant closures. It is estimated that for each megawatt of offshore wind, 7.5 permanent jobs will be created, with at least 20 to 30% of them being domestic. This is particularly important as the Bulgarian economy starts to recover from the global pandemic. At the EBRD, we have placed a massive emphasis on promoting renewable energy. Since our first renewable project, the AS Nikola wind farm in Kavarna, back in 2007, we have invested more than 6 billion euros, have developed more than 10 gigawatts of renewable energy. We have worked on over 200 projects in 13 countries. And perhaps most importantly, we have helped governments put in place the frameworks that make these renewable investments possible. While we have not yet financed any offshore wind project in our region, we have learned 4 important things from our renewable work. As these are relevant for unlocking Bulgaria's offshore wind potential, I would like to share this with you today. First, what investors are looking for. They look for the right opportunity. Countries where policymakers are making credible long-term commitments to support renewables with clear targets, in this case, clear offshore wind targets. Targets that send a message to citizens, to consumers, and to private investors that its energy future will be renewable. And in Bulgaria's case, its energy future will be offshore wind. Second, it's key that vision and commitments are backed by a supportive regulatory framework. Any new offshore wind regulatory framework should provide a clear and transparent process for licensing offshore wind parks in the Black Sea. A supportive framework is one that private investors can trust. This is very important as offshore wind projects require years, a lot of investment and licensing work before they're ready to be financed and construction to begin. The offshore wind regulatory framework should also clarify the role of the transmission system operator, its responsibilities, and the allocation of costs between the TSO and the private investors. And it should also provide a clear remuneration and support mechanism and describe the potential role of any state entities. Third, make it competitive. We have learned time after time that well-structured competitive auctions can deliver renewable capacity faster and more cheaply. While auctions are more cost-effective for solar energy, we also see auctions reducing the cost for offshore wind in advanced markets like the UK, Denmark, Germany, Belgium. A good example of how competition can bring renewable costs down is the work we did in Albania. The latest EBRD-supported solar tender delivered a highly competitive bid of 29.89 euros per megawatt hour. This is an impressive result. And finally, use us, the development banks, EU funding programs, and other institutions like IRENA, Energy Community, and Wind Europe. They are all here to support strong initiatives. EBRD can provide money, especially for the initial and the most difficult projects, but we can also provide technical assistance and problem solving to governments to develop low carbon pathways and the regulatory framework to promote renewables. We can help design renewable frameworks and organize competitive auctions so every country can benefit from the international experience to get it right first time. By the way of illustration, we are providing currently technical assistance to the Greek government to help it develop its own offshore wind regulatory framework. We hope this framework to be announced next month. The task ahead is big. We need an enormous green energy transition. For all the developments of recent years, renewable energy still only supplies a fraction of the global energy demand. Floating offshore wind is expected to dominate the global energy markets from 2030, and the countries which are taking action today will be tomorrow's market leaders. This is Bulgaria's moment. I urge you to seize it. Thank you, and I look forward to reviewing your report.
Thank you so much, Georgios. These are very inspiring words. I'm surprised, positively surprised that you believe so much in the Bulgarian capacity. I hope we have more people like you encouraging us to invest more in new types of renewable energy, new types for Bulgaria at least. And thank you for stressing on the role of the regulatory framework. It is key for enticing private investment, and it is crucial in designing a financial mechanism that is workable, that is transparent and effective. Otherwise, I don't believe that private investors would risk to enter a market such as Bulgaria. So we need to do our homework here first, and in order to attract more investment. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. And I'm going to read them aloud. Probably one of them can be answered by Maria, which is on Bulgaria and Romania, and whether there is an attempt by the government to incentivize private investment by covering the interconnection infrastructure for offshore wind. Because this is a key argument for private investors taking part in auctions. So far, there is no regulatory framework in place to begin with, but Maria can talk a little bit more about that. Then there is a question on whether Asia, whether European investors, Bulgarian and European offshore wind investors are interested in financing from Asia. And finally, how can we finance offshore projects in the Black Sea? How can private investors be sure that their money and their financial risk will be safeguarded? Before you answer these questions, I would like to quickly give the floor to Mr. De Landover, the former chairman of the Energy Committee in Parliament, for a quick intervention. Mr. Dobrev, please, the floor is yours.
I believe, Martin, we need to upgrade him to a speaker if we want to.
That's possible.
He has to. I hope that some of my colleagues can do that.
Maybe in the meanwhile, while I can answer the first questions.
Yes, Maria. Yeah.
The first question. So I see here two perspectives in the questions. I hope I got it right. So the first one is related to the regional cooperation, and as I said, it's key for the development of the offshore wind industry for several reasons. First of all, neighboring countries could benefit from cross-border scheme as regulated in the Renewable Energy Directive, but for doing so, they should be very well prepared and have exact parameters, exact plans about the regulatory and legislative steps for developing of new projects. Then the second reason would be the opportunity for collaborative establishment of port infrastructure and providing of port infrastructure services. Partner countries can establish synergies across supporting industries as well. Partnerships could lead to avoiding transmission bottlenecks, exchange of experience and know-how, etc. Then the second part of this question is related more about more to the mechanism of support. And here I would like to mention that the Center for the Study of Democracy has proposed to the Bulgarian caretaker government a design for auction mechanisms, which is based on the contracts for difference scheme, and which actually requires the state authorities to first prepare a development plan in order to coordinate the optimal spatial planning. As you see, actually the deployment areas with current technologies for both, especially for the bottle fix concept, are really limited. So we don't want to spare them, and they should be really optimally planned. Furthermore, we believe that the preliminary environmental studies should be conducted on national level first. And this is something that should be actually made also in partnership with Romania. Actually both actions, because we think that both countries would face the same problem, and it would be cost beneficial and time saving if these actions are planned and conducted by both countries in advance.
Thank you so much, Maria, for this thorough explanation. Mr. Dobrev, I think, is already a panelist. If you can unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for the interesting conference. For time and the discussion really very interesting. As you know, we are right now at the beginning of preliminary election campaign in Bulgaria, but I hope I will be a member of parliament again for the 7th time actually in December, so in mid-November. So I hope to be able to be the leader in parliament for the legislative changes for offshore wind that you mentioned about. So thank you very much for the conference, and I look forward to having a better look at the presentations that you've just talked about.
Thank you, Mr. Dobrev. We are looking forward to working with you and your colleagues in Parliament on designing a very efficient regulatory framework. And very quickly to the questions, we are running out of time a little bit, but let's have a go at the big question: do we need Asian financing? I think the answer is easy for that. And how do we safeguard private investors' interests? And where is Romania here? So is there a possibility for collaboration? Maybe whoever wants to take a hit at one of these questions from the panel, please go ahead. Try to be as short as possible. Thank you.
We should ask Jules and Catherine to say a few words.
And Catherine.
Okay, shall I say a few words first and then hand over to Catherine? First of all, Romania, there is a draft regulatory framework. It has gone through the upper house of the Romanian parliament. It's waiting to go through the lower house. It's been waiting for some time now. There's a lot of political interest in Romania in pursuing offshore wind. I think our advice as the wind industry to you all in Bulgaria is to fully explore the scope for doing joint projects with Romania, not least because that would unlock a lot of European financial support. Estonia and Latvia are doing a joint offshore wind farm. It's 1,000 megawatts. It will have a grid connection to both countries. The European Commission and the European Investment Bank absolutely love this project and will be pouring money into it. Anything that is cross-border and improving energy flows between countries and countries collaborating on renewables, that is music to the ears of the authorities in Brussels. One observation on Asian finance, non-European finance, there is already a lot of it in offshore wind in Europe. There's capital from the US, Canada, Japan, China, the UAE already invested in offshore wind in Europe. But at the same time, there's a huge amount of capital in Europe itself that is looking for a home. And there's growing appetite among institutional investors to invest in offshore wind for the stable returns that they see it having. Pension funds, insurance companies in Europe itself are showing increasing appetite for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Giles. And maybe just a sentence from Catherine, and I would like to ask Ambassador Dixon for closing remark.
Thank you. I would just echo what Giles said. The sources of finance into offshore wind in the UK are very diverse. Some are domestic, some are European, some are further afield. Perhaps compared to some other large plants like nuclear plants, it's a bit less controversial, and perhaps there's some less kind of security concerns around the development of wind, and maybe that makes it easier as well to have a kind of open investment framework.
Thank you, Catherine. Ambassador Dixon.
Thank you ever so much. I mean, firstly, to CSD for putting on this great discussion today and for producing what I think is a really interesting report and a really useful set of proposals, I think, that not only go beyond what is technically possible, but the necessary changes that a government can start to get their heads around in terms of what would be needed in terms of regulatory frameworks, investment frameworks, etc. I think that's incredibly important. I think the second thing to say is thank you so much to the panelists. This has been a really rich discussion. Thank you so much to Catherine for re-engaging with Bulgaria. It's great to see you, but genuinely to all of you who've been able to be part of this discussion, very, very useful indeed. I do think that this is the start of a process. Bulgaria is at the start of a conversation that was begun in the UK about a decade ago, a little longer, but one that has moved very, very quickly. We don't claim, I think, to have all of the answers, but what we do have is some of the lessons, both positive and negative. So I would be very happy to work with CSD to engage the government, to present the findings of the report, to bring further UK, both government, but also commercial experience around wind to bear, to expose that to the Bulgarian government in the hope that we will be able to present some of the beneficial options that do sit there. So thank you ever so much to CSD. Thank you ever so much to the partners and friends who've joined today's discussion. It's been really powerful. And I hope this is a start of a conversation. And I hope for those of you who've engaged with Bulgaria for the first time, we might have hooked you in to a little bit more in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dixon. We're looking forward to cooperating on all these issues. And thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to Giles Dixon, to Catherine Barber, Dan McGrail, and Georgios Gekioris. I'm sorry for pronouncing this name incorrectly. Thank you all for the very inspiring speeches and the belief for the future of Bulgarian renewable energy. We are going to publish all of the presentation online at CSD's website. So feel free to check them out. And we're looking forward to answering all of your questions and getting this cooperation started in the very near future. Thank you all. Goodbye and have a great day.